Oh, so let's get into today's bonus episode. So we have completed reading The Three-Body Problem, and we hope you joined us for that journey. But we wanted to do a little bonus episode today. This is actually a recommendation that came from a listener to talk about Liu Xixin's short story collection. And we don't have time to cover all of the short stories in this collection, but we figured, hey, let's tackle the titular short story, the very first one, which is called Wandering Earth. Very quickly, let me just summarize the short story for folks who may not be familiar or who haven't checked it out in a while. It's very simple, it's very short. Basically, the premise is that humanity has realized that the sun is about to go supernova and consume the solar system and kill all of us.
Yep.
And so a worldwide coalition has come together and come up with this plan to use these enormous Earth engines, to use thousands and thousands of giant Earth engines placed in Asia and in North America on opposite ends of the globe to basically first stop the rotation of the Earth and then to break its orbit around the sun using some sort of like slingshot around Jupiter method to propel Earth out of our solar system toward Proxima Centauri, where we know the suns will be able to sustain life. That's the game plan. Basically, just take Earth and move it somewhere else so that the sun doesn't kill us.
Pretty straightforward. Little planetary slingshot.
Just a little planetary slingshot, that's right. Of course, there is division among humanity. You have the takers. They support the coalition. They support the Wandering Earth plan. But then on the other side, you have the leavers, who want to just build spaceships and completely abandon Earth and make a run for it across the galaxy. Now, the story basically follows an unnamed protagonist whose entire life we basically experience in little snippets.
Right.
And then we also learn that he eventually meets and marries a woman during an Olympic trial that he participates in. They have a child together. Fast forward a bit more, the wife and our unnamed protagonist basically go down opposite paths in life. She joins the Leaver Rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
As a civil war breaks out between the takers and the leavers, he ends up joining the coalition army. Unfortunately for him, the coalition army is overwhelmed by the rebels, and the last 5,000 holdouts of the takers of the coalition core group are condemned to death.
Right.
Unfortunately, as the story wraps up, we learn that the coalition was in fact correct, because the leavers, after having eradicated the last 5,000 people, look at the sun and watch it go supernova and realize that they've made a terrible mistake and that they have to commit to the slingshot plan. So that's the story in brief, start to finish. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, so this isn't the first short story that I've read by Cixin, and as I've also read some of the stories in To Hold Up the Sky, another collection of short stories that he published, I think actually more recently, and I've definitely grown to really love Cixin and his kind of style of writing, which I will say is pretty recognizable. Like, he definitely has a very distinct kind of voice and storytelling method, relies on these like single person monologues, and you kind of get to see, you know, their life chronicled over the course of the narrative of, you know, the story. And we, of course, see that here with our unnamed protagonist, which is also kind of a trope for Cixin. These characters who, you know, who kind of fade into the background as kind of a vehicle for, you know, his more, you know, interesting scientific exposition and also just the kind of broader mystery or, you know, adventure in the story. And so, yeah, we have those elements in this as well. But all in all, you know, I liked it. I mean, it was a pretty novel take on the apocalypse story, like the dystopian future, wherein we are doing the kind of boldest, most audacious plan that a sci-fi writer can imagine, with, you know, these massive, essentially rockets the size of Everest. It sounded like, I think at one point they were like 2,000 meters taller than Everest. So I mean, really quite a, I mean, yeah, it's a a fascinating idea. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. What are you thinking?
I agree. I certainly had the same sense that you did, that this is very Liu Cixin.
Yeah.
He's definitely got a brand of writing, and I can't say that I don't enjoy it. I think I, in fact, really enjoy it,
Yeah.
and I really enjoyed this short story, start to finish. I actually think the short story format maybe plays nicer with Liu Cixin's writing style than perhaps
Mm.
a full novel that requires things like, oh, I don't know, characters and emotional weight and character arcs. Not
Right.
that, I'm
Right.
making it sound like he's a terrible writer. He does all of
Yeah.
those
Yeah. Yeah.
things, but he does have
Totally.
shortcomings in those areas.
Yeah. Well, they're definitely secondary for him. So
They're
yeah.
definitely secondary to the ideas. And I think in a short story format, he gets to just kind of wave those things away because it's a short
Right.
story. And he gets to
Right.
focus
Right.
on the thing he's obviously way more interested in, which is the big scientific idea and the nerdiness of it all.
Right. Right.
And honestly, as a reader in a short story format, I feel more comfortable just waving those things away too. Because whatever, we,
Fair.
we have like 50 to 80 pages to cover a story.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
going to ask for like deep three-dimensional characters with flaws and
Right.
plot twists.
Right.
Like, just tell me the gist. And I think this was actually quite the enjoyable read. And it felt very much like an extension. This could have been like a chapter in Three Body Problem.
Right.
And again, he wrote this years before Three Body Problem, and you can see some of
Yeah.
the seeds of the ideas that will make their way into his larger novels. So I
Yes.
enjoyed it. I enjoyed the concept overall. I did do some Googling because I realized there's a movie. I don't know if you saw this. I watched the
Yes.
trailer
Yes.
earlier,
Yes.
but there is an action adventure Chinese movie of the same name called Wandering Earth that came out in 2019.
Yep.
Based on the trailers and a 20-minute summary video that I watched of it, it seems to basically only borrow the premise and nothing else
Hmm.
from the short story. Again, not that there's so much to borrow anyway, but it takes the premise and then kind of runs with it in a more action adventure oriented way. And it seemed to have done well because it got a sequel film in 2023, I believe. And if, for folks who might be interested, I think the first movie is actually available to stream on Netflix,
Right.
and I might check it out.
Nice.
So obviously, this is a popular book in the East, and we're seeing the adaptations that were quite popular in the East finally make their way over to the West here as well. And I thought that was quite interesting. I'm curious, talking like sort of big themes and ideas, what resonated with you in this story? What stood out?
Yeah. There's definitely no shortage of them, which is kind of one of his magical abilities as a writer is that he can just kind of pack a story dense with, really novel themes, but also things that just kind of resonate on a little bit more of a primal level. So like in the case of
Yeah,
this novel or this short story, for example, there's the broader motif of like the struggle for survival and like what we will do at any cost to ensure the continuity of the human species, like I
right.
think at the heart of this is kind of this like dystopian survival story, but on the other hand, it is kind of an optimistic one. Like ultimately, this is a
Yeah,
story of us like fighting for our continued survival and like defying the odds. Like the sun is going to explode and destroy the solar system. but still we rally together and we come up with a solution. So like this like motif of, like kind of defying all the like facing the death defying odds and persevering, and that being, emblematic of the human species is a thing that I think like Cixin kind of continues to like ring the bell of, that like we
yes,
are a species devoted to and absolutely committed to, the collective survival.
right. Is that a so my only experience with Shishin is Three Body Problem and this short story, Wandering Earth. Is that an idea that he toys with in the other stories you've read as well?
Yes, definitely. Like it's yeah, like I don't think he is truly capable of writing a purely dystopian tale because I think there is a part of him
Ah,
that feels maybe some sort of responsibility to, and I think he would probably deny this, but like some sort of responsibility to like inspire us to not give up hope,
Amazing.
which
Hell
is
yeah.
so that's me psychoanalyzing his subconscious like motive there, but
Yeah.
I do think he's got some like motivation of like you know encouraging us, to like not go completely postal, like to like have
Yes.
to like hold on to some sort of scientifically rooted confidence, but some sort of some faith that will make it through.
Right. I love that. And that was present in Three Body Problem as well, right? We talked about it at length. It's a deeply pessimistic book on its surface, but when you dig deeper, you have characters like Da Shi who
Right,
are committed to human resilience, right?
right,
And this commitment to human survival against all odds. And the sun
right.
blowing up, I would consider all odds, Like that is
Yeah,
probably one of the biggest challenges humanity could face. And to see them come together under the coalition in this way and come up with a solution, very interesting stuff. And I think speaks to
totally.
the little seed of hope that Shishin always plants in stories like this.
Right,
I really liked that you brought up the fact that there's this motif of this existential crisis, right? Three body problem. The existential crisis is aliens.
right,
Here it is a natural phenomenon with the sun exploding. I think what's interesting is Shishin loves to explore the cultural fallout when humanity is not even really facing the crisis, but is just facing the idea of the crisis.
right,
Like the sun doesn't explode in this short story until literally like the very end, the last few paragraphs. Everything up to that point is just humanity's reaction to maybe the sun exploding. And we see some of the cultural changes, right? We have love basically changing dramatically, culture changing dramatically.
yes,
The protagonist's father is like, I'm going to go have a little tryst with your teacher for a few months, but then I'll be back. And
right.
survival at all costs has seeped its way into humanity so much that like there's no room
That's
for
just fine.
things like
Yeah,
love and empathy and comfort and
right,
there's no time to doom scroll on Twitter when you're doom scrolling reality every minute of the day.
right, right,
So I think that's really fascinating. I think Shishin is really interested in this idea of how will we as humanity collectively and individually react if faced with this extinction level impossible threat. And he likes to throw his characters into that scenario.
Oh, totally, totally. Yeah, it's also interesting, like towards the I guess it's in the third chapter, but there is this kind of essentially conspiracy that emerges amongst the
Yes.
effectively the global population that
Mhm.
the entirety of the plan to leave, our solar system and our sun was essentially like a power play by this like shadow
Right.
clandestine, but also all powerful government, and
Yes, QAnon.
QAnon essentially, predicted 20 years before its time, and uh, and and effectively, like they are so convinced that even the forces of the government, start to kind of give up. They're finding that they're being eroded, and like the line that they're defending is retreating further and further back until they're basically just defending the
Right.
Earth engines. Like they're at the kind of precipice of defeat, and then they do like kind of cede control, and like the rebels do in fact win, only for the original kind of 5,000 remaining being vindicated when the Earth's sun does in fact explode. So it's kind of interesting. Like there is a
Yeah.
conspiracy that seems to be at play, and everybody is kind of convinced of it. But ultimately, there's a tale to like, well, the scientists were vindicated in the end. Like they,
Yes.
you should have kept your stock in the science.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you brought that up. Literally, a bullet point on my notes here in front of me is the supremacy of science. Shishin loves science, obviously, right?
Right.
But
Yes. Yeah.
I think he also loves science as perhaps like humanity's salvation. Maybe that's too strong a way to put it, but
Sure.
he backs science fully,
Oh,
Liu Shishin,
totally.
in these stories. And in fact, in this story, I don't know if you picked up on it, but when the protagonist's wife joins the rebel cause, there's a guy basically giving a sermon, right? About how the sun is like holy and will save them and we never should have abandoned the sun.
Right, right,
And I got this sense that like Liu Shan again is sort of playing with this idea of like, science versus faith,
right,
the
right,
arrogance of faith versus the supremacy of science.
right, right,
And obviously by the end of the story, we are told which side was correct at the end of the day.
right. And I do think like he does attempt to give space in all of his writing for the probably like justified challenge to science and to like rational kind of our traditional rational discourse. Like he does always kind of give a little bit of space to like kind of critiquing that perspective, but
Yeah,
ultimately
certainly.
kind of always returns to like the underscoring that this is our best tool. Like it may be imperfect, but science is still our best tool for answering the mysteries that surround us.
Yeah, completely agreed. Okay, let's talk critiques here for a couple of minutes. I did some Googling, and it's a short story from over 20 years ago, so there's like not a lot out there, not many hot takes on this one.
Sure.
We've already chatted a bit about, shallow, literally unnamed characters littered all
Right.
throughout Cixin's books. That's something we talked about at length with Three Body Problem. Another critique I came across, though, I don't know if I agree with this, was that the reviewer didn't like that this book basically condemns the idea of independent or rebellious thought
Hmm.
and condemns the idea of like sort of individualistic actions against the state and that that like falling in line with state actions is what you should be doing. I got the sense the
Interesting.
reviewer was kind of reading a bit too much into like China communist biases here.
Yeah, I will say I don't think it's like an implausible interpretation. Like I can definitely see a kernel of, where that idea might emerge from. Just kind of given the ultimately kind of resounding like defense of the coalition government and the coalition
Yeah,
forces essentially.
yeah,
Like, ultimately like the conspiracy theorists were going off of some amount of scientific reasoning. Like they were told that there was a timeline that they should expect to see the helium flash on such and such kind of in such and such period, and for them to have like fired probes towards our sun, and like for all of the data that
right.
it came back to basically
Yeah,
be counter to the original scientific kind of conclusions. I mean that they were relying on science to like reach that perspective, and
true.
ultimately they happen to be wrong in this case. But it was kind of a question of timeline, like a question of when. Like if it had been
Yeah,
another
yeah,
say 5,000 years for that helium flash, like they would have felt just as vindicated and justified as the coalition forces in the end were. And ultimately, like to interpret this then as you know uh falling in line with the state perspective, like that
mm-hmm,
is
mm-hmm.
kind of what happens here. Like that's, I don't know,
Yeah,
it's at least
yeah,
a metaphor, or like I can see where they're drawing that analogy. So I
yeah,
don't know, like I
certainly.
don't necessarily agree, but I can see where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense where they're coming from. And I will say, I think there's a cultural divide here that's worth considering that we chatted a lot about with Three Body as well, right? Because Western culture is so individualistic, we are often told stories where the individual is the one that wins at the
Right,
end against something like a larger corporation or state or entity.
right,
Whereas many Eastern cultures are very collectivist
right,
and Eastern stories will often prioritize or focus on the needs of the many over the needs of the few, or even the needs of the individual. And this is very much a story where we are trying to save as much of humanity as we can, given the impossible odds.
right.
And we kind of do need everyone to fall in line if
Yeah,
many of you want to see your great 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 grandchildren survive in 2000 years.
right,
And, it kind of all just circles back to the same ideas that we are facing with something like the climate crisis, right? It won't affect me. It won't affect you, mostly, besides like annoyingly hot 95-degree summer days in New York.
Right.
But it will affect perhaps our children, our grandchildren, and it will certainly affect our great-grandchildren. And how
Right.
much do we care now to make changes so that people we will never meet or see can live a better life? And I think that
Right.
is at the heart of this Wandering Earth story as well.
Right. 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 That's beautiful.
And this story certainly made me think of all of that. Okay, so to wrap up, final thoughts, overall thoughts, and let's give this short story a rating as we do out of 5. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, for someone that hasn't read any of Cixin's writing, I think this is a great introduction. Like, this will definitely give you a flavor of
Yeah.
what's in store for you if you pick up any of his longer works, or even the other short stories in this book or others. This is the perfect kind of microcosm of Cixin. Like, this is everything that you'll kind of grow to love and love or hate about his writing. So
Yeah.
lots of kind of like
Yes.
deep scientific jargon that is really, I mean, I will say, like, does make for a story that feels supremely human. Like, this feels like we are
Yes.
talking about something that we could absolutely be facing, and the dramas that will inevitably kind of unfold as we like grapple with
Yes.
this like cosmic scale threat, essentially. So I think this is classic Cixin, and therefore, like, I can't I can't give this a bad rating. I don't think I could give it the highest rating, only because
Yeah.
it doesn't stand out, at least in my mind, from some of his other works. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'd give it a solid 4, which is it's a great
Yeah.
rating. But I
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think
That's
ultimately,
high.
like,
That's high.
it's a high rating. I mean, ultimately, this is a great little short story.
Right. I would actually give it the same exact rating. I'm kind of with
Yeah,
you in the same boat. I really liked your point that if you're interested in Liu Xixin's writing, this could be a nice little entryway. It's short,
totally.
it's a quick read, you can knock it out in a little afternoon, and it will give you a sense of how Liu Xixin writes and how his stories go. If Wandering
Right,
Earth grabs you, I imagine something like Three Body Problem or that trilogy will also grab you. They're very
right,
similar in many ways. And again, as I stated earlier, I actually think the short story format plays to his strengths a bit more.
right,
Things like his less believable ideas don't overstay their welcome, for example, in a short story like this, right? Like I couldn't help but ask myself, Olympic Games, what the fuck? But then there was no time to think about it more. And we just moved on. And I was like, yeah, man, whatever.
yeah,
Olympic Games, I guess. Or
right,
the
right.
fact that, like, in one sentence, they send their kid to a foster home and never explain why.
Right.
Both parents are still
Right.
alive. And I was like, what foster home are we sending the
Yeah.
kid to?
Oh,
Why?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was a yeah, it is one sentence, and then it's like, well, now that we no longer have this child, I guess there's nothing keeping us
Right.
together.
I guess we
Move
don't
on.
love each other anymore. Right. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, you just needed an excuse to break these two up. Surely, Shishin,
Right.
I got you,
Right, right,
bro.
right.
But again, it's a short story. It's just like I can ask why, but like whatever, who cares? It's a short story. We're just getting to the
Right.
main ideas of it, and it plays better than something like me reading all of the Three Body Problem and being like, God damn it, the ETO makes no sense,
Right.
and me spending 400 pages being mad about the ETO not making sense versus
Right.
me spending like 10 seconds wondering why they sent their kid to foster
Right.
school and to a foster home and then forgetting about it and moving on. So
Yes.
all of that to say is I really enjoyed the short story. I like Shishin's writing, and I think this is a great entry point for people who want to explore more of his work. And I too would give it a four-step plan out of 5-step
Mm.
slingshot plan or whatever. There's a joke. There's a joke in there somewhere. Loved it. 4 out of 5. I would wander again.
Yes, definitely would recommend. This is a nice, easy kind of a great read in the vein of Cixin's his universe.
Yeah, for sure. All right, folks, that wraps it up for this bonus episode. And frankly, that kind of puts a bow on our journey with Liu Xixin for now and our journey with the Three Body Problem. Because coming up in a couple of weeks, we are diving into a brand new book. We'll be reading Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. It's a multi-award winning sci-fi novel from 10 years ago, and we're super excited to dive into it, and we hope you'll be joining us on that read as you did with Three Body Problem. Should be a fun one.
That's right.
So we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for listening.